One sweltering June evening in 1983, the neon lights from a small motel in Arlington, Texas, cast onto the dark sky, reflecting on the face of a 12-year-old girl stepping out with a trash bag in hand. Just a few minutes later, that figure vanished into the night. No cry, no trace. When the police arrived, all that remained were a pair of small flip-flops lying scattered on the empty lot and a torn nylon bag. The nightmare began to envelop the Fort Worth community, and scattered clues stretching over 3 decades turned the case into one of Texas's most haunting cold cases. 38 years later, an old DNA sample from 1983 would force the entire American investigative system to reconsider the notion that time erases sin. Before diving into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love these journeys to seek forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The summer of 1983, Arlington was immersed in the dry heat of South Texas. The road in front of Kensington Motor Lodge shimmered with melting asphalt, the sound of insects mingling with the distant rumble of trucks, creating an endless backdrop to what seemed like a peaceful town. The Carter family had rented a small room at the end of the row after moving from Fort Worth. The cramped room, with its rattling ceiling fan, TV broadcasting the evening news. Elaine Carter was cleaning up dinner, while Lydia, the 12-year-old daughter with dark blonde hair and a petite build, sat at the table, diligently writing something in an old notebook. The girl was obedient, quiet, and liked jotting down little daily happenings. When her mother told her to take out the trash, Lydia grabbed the white nylon bag, slipped on her worn flip-flops, and stepped into the hallway bathed in dim yellow light. The room door closed, the shuffling sound of flip-flops fading away. Outside, heat rose from the concrete pavement, the smell of motor oil from the parking lot still lingering. Lydia headed toward the back of the building, where the communal dumpster was. After that, no one saw her again. In the room, Elaine finished clearing the plates, then suddenly noticed the unusual silence. She called out to her daughter through the door, no response. Opening the door, the hallway was empty, only dim light and the hum of a fan from another room echoing. Elaine walked a few laps around the building, her steps growing quicker each time she didn't see her daughter's figure. At the end of the row, against the corner wall, the trash bag still lay intact, not yet discarded. A chill ran down her spine. She continued searching around the parking lot, the empty lot behind the motel, calling out Lydia's name loudly into the stifling night. A few motel guests cracked their doors, shaking their heads. No one knew where the girl had gone. Mark, Lydia's brother, grabbed an old flashlight, sweeping it over the fence and grass patch. Only the wind and insects answered. Elaine returned to the room, trying to calm herself. She checked the closet, under the bed, looking around as if hoping the girl was just hiding somewhere. On the table, Lydia's small notebook lay open, the pen still in place. She turned back out, hurrying toward the front desk. The night clerk stood up when he saw her pale face. Elaine gripped the edge of the counter, her voice breaking as she said her daughter had disappeared. The employee handed her the desk phone. Her hands trembled as she dialed the emergency number, each digit feeling endless. When the operator answered, Elaine took a breath, her voice halting. "This is Elaine Carter. My daughter is 12 years old. She went out just a few minutes ago, and she hasn't come back. We've looked everywhere." The wail of police sirens echoed through the quiet night, red and blue lights sweeping across the front of Kensington Motor Lodge. 2 Arlington Police Department patrol cars pulled up to the entrance, dust kicking up in the still swirling heat. A young female officer and Lieutenant Ray Hensley stepped out, jotting notes quickly as Elaine Carter recounted what had just happened. She trembled, her voice choking, while Mark stood beside her, still clutching the dim flashlight. Hensley scanned the building, empty hallway, parking lot with 3 old sedans, no traffic. He ordered the establishment of a search perimeter of 200 meters around the motel. Within half an hour, 4 more units arrived. Floodlights illuminated the area behind the motel, figures moving along the fence line. The crackle of radios mixed with the chirping of night crickets, the air thick with tension. A team of officers split up to canvass the row of rooms, questioning each guest. Most hadn't heard or seen anything. Only a few mentioned the sound of a truck engine echoing around dusk, but unsure of the direction. Hensley noted it down, ordering the search radius expanded toward the empty lot bordering the side road leading to the highway. Motel staff and a few nearby residents volunteered to help. They carried flashlights, walking in lines, slowly sweeping beams over bushes, trash cans. A canine unit was brought in, the dog sniffing around the building. Portable floodlight beams cut through dry grass, casting long shadows. No one spoke. Only radio chatter reported negative results from each sector. Around midnight, an officer shouted upon spotting something unusual near the back fence. Hensley rushed over, crouching down a small flip-flop, strap broken, lying next to a faint drag mark in the dirt. A few steps away was the white trash bag, still tied shut, unopened. He lifted it with gloved hands. Preliminary check, inside only a food container, and a few soda cans. The simple scene silenced the group. Hensley marked the location, requesting photos and evidence stakes. Elaine stood outside the fence, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the police work. Each time a flashlight beam swept toward the back empty lot, she tensed as if about to scream. A female officer approached to comfort her, suggesting she go back to the room to rest, but Elaine shook her head. She couldn't sit still while her daughter hadn't been found. Mark stood next to his mother, eyes glazed. Near 1 a.m., the search team expanded toward the dirt road connecting to Trinity Boulevard. They combed every meter of grass, checked storm drains, ditches, an abandoned house about 300 meters from the motel. The canine alerted a few times then returned to the starting point. No foreign scents, no drag marks. Hensley noted in his log, no signs of struggle on site, possibly coerced movement. At the front desk, an area map was spread out. Police used markers to circle the motel and highway exit routes. An officer suggested checking the list of trucks parked nearby that night. But at this time, Arlington had no traffic cameras, and local motels lacked recording equipment. Everything relied on witness statements and recollections. Hensley ordered a full check of all rooms in the row, from 101 to 118. Each door was knocked on, questions asked quickly. Many guests were asleep, a few drunks shook their heads. A man in room 109 said he'd heard an engine start that evening, but saw nothing else. The data was too sparse to form any investigative leads. By 2 a.m., the search team took a break. Exhaustion hung in the air. Patrol cars parked in a row, floodlights still on, illuminating the dusty yard. Hensley sat on a hood, reviewing notes. He knew if no new traces were found before dawn, this would shift to a criminal missing persons case. Elaine sat nearby, eyes vacant, hands clasped together. A volunteer nurse offered her a cup of water. She didn't drink. Around 4 a.m., the sky began to lighten, wind from the river carrying humidity. The search team launched one final sweep. They traced out to a small canal bank, a mile from the motel, but still nothing. As the first dawn light broke, Hensley called off the search. He told the team they'd resume once full daylight allowed expansion toward the Trinity River. Elaine watched the empty motel yard as police packed equipment. Lydia's flip-flop and trash bag had been sealed and taken away. She asked Hensley if the girl could have just gotten lost. He didn't answer. He just nodded slightly, saying they'd return in the morning. As the patrol cars left, the parking lot sank back into silence. The neon sign, Kensington Motor Lodge, flickered weakly. Early morning wind carried cold dampness through the grass rows, dispelling the long night's heat, but not the fear gripping the mother's heart. The initial search ended without any other traces beyond the small flip-flop and abandoned trash bag. Two ordinary items now, the only evidence of something horrific that had just occurred. The next morning, early sunlight gilded the Trinity River's surface, murky steam rising from its bed after the stifling night. A few miles from Kensington Motor Lodge, two Handley-Etterville Bridge construction workers walked along the water's edge checking terrain. As one bent down to the grass margin, he spotted something glinting in the sun, a small pale arm. They called to a colleague, then immediately reported to police. At 7 a.m., Fort Worth Police Department received the call, coordinating with Arlington PD. Lieutenant Ray Hensley, in charge of the previous night's missing person case, arrived first. Amid grass and mud, a girl's body lay on its side, torso half covered in sand. The flip-flops, build, hair, all matched Elaine Carter's description. No further confirmation needed. Hensley knew it was Lydia Carter. The riverbank area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Forensics personnel began photographing, setting evidence markers. A team of technicians swept the site, documenting every detail. Receding water left small truck tire tracks on damp ground. Nearby, grass lightly trampled, indicating the body was placed down rather than dragged. Hensley noted, "Not a burial, someone wanted her to be found." As forensics lifted the victim's arm, they discovered a white nylon cord, nearly a meter long, tangled in the mud. A few meters away, a mud-caked torn paper scrap, ink-smudged, with only two clear kickers. Both items were sealed. A technician cast the tire tracks in plaster cross-groove pattern, characteristic of late 1970 Ford small trucks, common among local workers. The crime scene examiner's preliminary report stated, "Death by ligature strangulation with soft object. Body moved post-mortem." The neck ligature marks were smooth, no serrations, even pull force, suggesting a calm, controlled perpetrator. Under Lydia's fingernails, gray synthetic fiber, material common in industrial gloves. Soil samples from her feet collected for comparison to motel area dirt. The investigative team expanded northward along the side road, connecting to Highway 287. They found a few small skid marks in the sand, large men's shoe prints. No signs of struggle, no blood. The scene was unusually tidy, as if deliberately staged. Hensley ordered a canvass of recent workers on riverbank construction projects, especially small truck drivers. At Arlington headquarters, Elaine and Mark Carter were officially notified at noon. No one in the room spoke as Hensley confirmed the body had been found. He only promised to find who did this. Off-site, forensics completed documentation. All evidence, nylon cord, paper scrap, hair fibers, soil samples, was sealed and sent to Tarrant County Medical Examiner's Office. Preliminary autopsy results confirmed death between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m. the previous night. No signs of sexual assault. Neck strangulation matched the nylon cord found at the scene exactly. Mud under toenails contained clay and fine sand, differing from motel area soil, proving Lydia was transported by vehicle, likely a small truck. In a quick briefing at Fort Worth PD that afternoon, Hensley presented a presumed movement route map, motel side road, Trinity River. He marked the 4-mile distance and 10-minute drive time. A young officer noted that stretch saw mostly construction traffic, sparse residents. Initial conclusion, perpetrator knew the terrain and likely worked in the area. Police canvassed river-adjacent projects, pulling June 1983 worker lists. Many confirmed seeing an old beige truck parked nearby a few nights prior, but no plate recall. Though scant, Hensley believed it was the first lead. He archived all tire impressions for comparison. That afternoon, as the sun lowered, technicians returned for a final metal detector sweep. No weapon found, just more cord fragments. Along the riverbank, officers' footprints overlaid old mud marks, creating a chaotic picture of a night of crime. When work wrapped, Lydia's body was transported to Tarrant County Morgue for detailed examination. Hensley's end-of-day report was concise. Victim, Lydia Carter. 12 years old. Cause of death, strangulation. Evidence, nylon cord, AM paper scrap, synthetic gray fiber, small truck tire tracks. Assumption, perpetrator local, familiar with riverbank construction area. Transported body by vehicle, staged scene to mislead investigation. News of the discovery spread quickly that afternoon. Local papers ran a brief line, body of missing girl found near Trinity River. No one but police knew details, but Arlington buzzed with talk. At Kensington Motor Lodge, guests placed flowers and candles on the steps. Elaine Carter remained silent in her room, door shut tight. Night fell. Hensley returned to the scene once more. The cordon tape was down. Only tire tracks and small wooden stakes along the river edge remained. The faint rush of water under the bridge, scent of mud and damp grass wafting. He stood still, gazing along the dirt road to the highway. In his mind, pieces began forming, a girl leaving the motel less than 10 minutes after dark, a small truck appearing somewhere nearby, and the next morning, body placed right where it would be easily seen. Not the act of a panicked person, it was the sign of someone seeking control, or sending a message. Hensley jotted in his notebook, intentional display, not random disposal. The line closed the final page of the first day's investigation. The search had ended, but from this moment, the case officially shifted to homicide investigation. Somewhere between Arlington and Fort Worth, a man still freely drove his small truck, carrying the secret of Lydia Carter's death. On the afternoon of June 27, 1983, in the temporary office of the Arlington Police Department, Lieutenant Ray Hensley and his team of investigators gathered around a table cluttered with maps, photographs, and evidence bags from the Trinity Riverbank. The preliminary autopsy report had just arrived, determining that Lydia Carter had died between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m. the previous evening, coinciding with the time she left the motel. The ligature marks around her neck were from smooth nylon cord, pulled from left to right, even clean force, indicating the perpetrator was right-handed and used a tool rather than bare hands. This type of cord was manufactured for the construction and mechanical industries, commonly used on job sites or in repair shops. When cross-referencing with the topographic map, Hensley noted that the route from Kensington Motor Lodge to the riverbank was just over 4 miles, a drive of less than 10 minutes, passing through the construction site for the Handley-Etterville Bridge. No residential areas, no streetlights. The perpetrator must have known the area well to move so easily without attracting attention. He requested a detailed map, marking potential stopping points and body disposal spots in the darkness. The forensics lab reported further on the tire tracks. The plaster cast showed tread patterns from Goodyear Tracker AT tires, common on late 1970s Ford Econoline or Chevrolet C10 models. The tracks matched the type on the vehicle of the man arrested the previous night, Doug Renner, but differed in manufacturing year. The perpetrator might have deliberately planted false evidence. Microscopic analysis of the nylon cord fibers revealed ultrafine metal dust, typical in welding or machining environments. Under Lydia's fingernails were gray synthetic fibers, polyester cotton blend, the kind used in industrial work gloves. Hensley noted, perpetrator has technical skills, likely a mechanic or electrician. He requested a review of similar cases in the area. A young officer, Charles Linwood, recalled the 1981 strangulation of a young girl in Waco, the body also placed by the river not hidden. Upon comparing files, the knotting method and body position nearly matched. Despite the nearly 90-mile distance, Hensley believed the two cases could be the same modus operandi. He proposed forming a temporary liaison team with Waco police to compare data. Geological analysis of the mud on Lydia's feet showed mineral composition matching the soil at the Handley-Etterville construction site, reinforcing the hypothesis that the victim was transported from that area. Police compiled a list of all workers on site the night of June 26, over 50 men, most driving older small trucks. In the list, Evan McAllister, a contract electrician disciplined in 1982 for fighting, was flagged as noteworthy. He lived in a trailer park 2 miles from the scene and drove a 1978 beige truck. However, there wasn't enough evidence to list him as a suspect yet. The afternoon analysis meeting stretched into the evening. On the board, Hensley chalked 4 conclusions: victim strangled with industrial nylon cord, body transported in a small truck, possibly 1975, 1979 model, perpetrator familiar with terrain, chose low traffic area, no signs of robbery or assault, motive possibly control or psychological. Investigators compared the cord type and tire treads with local store data. Within a 10-mile radius of Arlington, hundreds owned similar trucks, and nylon cord was widely sold, clouding the investigative leads. Hensley knew this case wouldn't crack quickly. The perpetrator hadn't acted impulsively, but had planned meticulously, knowing how to avoid direct traces. He sent the end-of-day report to superiors, with recommendations to expand the investigation to construction sites along the Trinity, and check all night shift workers. A copy went to Fort Worth PD and the Dallas FBI Office for behavioral analysis. Though data was sparse, the crime pattern emerged. Perpetrator knew the terrain, used industrial materials, acted coldly, left the body in a discoverable position, like a message or challenge. As night fell, Hensley sat alone in the room, staring at the crime scene photo, Lydia's small body on the wet grass. He clearly sensed this wasn't a random crime. That guy wanted police to see his work, wanted to control how it was discovered. Hensley wrote the final line in his notebook: "Not an accident, not impulsive. This is someone who understands how we work, and he's watching us follow his trail." Outside the window, early summer rain pattered softly, reflecting off the dim streetlights. In the sound of the rain, he knew the Lydia Carter case was just beginning, and the man they sought might be very close, blending among the workers who still went to their jobs every day along the Trinity River. 2 days after receiving the autopsy report, Lieutenant Ray Hensley circled a standout name on the list of workers at the Handley-Etterville Bridge construction site: Doug Renner, 34, freelance electrician, previously arrested for disorderly conduct in 1979. He lived in a row of apartments, less than 2 miles from the Trinity River bank, and owned a 1978 Ford Econoline, the exact truck model matching the tire tracks collected at the scene. That afternoon, Hensley and 2 officers went to meet Doug. His truck was parked out front, caked with fresh mud, tire treads matching the sample photos exactly. Doug opened the door, lean build, clothes stained with oil, raspy voice. When questioned, he said he'd worked the morning shift on June 26, then stayed home all evening watching baseball. Hensley requested to search the truck. In the bed, they found gloves, electrical cords, welding tools, and 3 rolls of white nylon cord, the industrial kind. 1 roll was opened, with cut marks. All of it was seized as evidence. At the station, Doug stated the nylon cord was bought at a Fort Worth hardware store to tie down electrical conduits. Everyone on a job site has some. He cooperated, showing no worry. The forensics lab compared the cord samples from his truck to the fiber at the scene. Results: same type, different structure. Doug's had a hollow core, the scene cord a solid core. Though not an exact match, the similarity kept police holding him for further questioning. Meanwhile, several people at the motel reported seeing a silver-gray pickup truck drive by the night Lydia disappeared. The description fit Doug's vehicle. The press immediately ran headlines. Police zero in on prime suspect, sparking public frenzy. Hensley, cautious, ordered blood and hair samples from Doug to compare with evidence. 3 days later, results came back. Blood type didn't match, and no matching enzymes found in samples from the victim. Plus, no fibers or hairs from Doug and Lydia's belongings. The evidence began to crumble. When re-interviewed, Doug stuck to his story. He said he'd been home with neighbor Carl Jensen that evening, watching the Rangers vs. Yankees game. Carl confirmed it. even producing a pizza delivery receipt from 8:40 p.m., right at the estimated time of Lydia's death. Alibi solid. Hensley had the mud on Doug's tires tested. Results showed the same composition as soil from the construction site near the river, where he'd worked on June 25. That explained the mud, but didn't prove case involvement. With no direct links provable, Hensley had to release Doug. In the follow-up meeting, Hensley laid out all the data again. Doug had the truck job and materials that matched, but all were common among workers. A young officer remarked, "Maybe the perp deliberately picked someone like Renner to throw us off." The comment silenced the room. Hensley began to believe the scene wasn't just a dump site, but a preset investigative trap. On July 2, Doug Renner was officially released after 4 days in custody. The press ran a brief story, "Suspect in Lydia Carter case freed, due to lack of evidence." Some locals protested, others said police had jumped the gun. Doug returned to his apartment, declining all interviews. That evening, Hensley noted in his logbook, "Suspect Doug Renner, electrician. Vehicle 1978 Ford Econoline. Tire type matches scene. Evidence, not authenticated. Alibi witnessed. Conclusion cleared as suspect." At the bottom, he added a short line in red ink. Perp may have deliberately planted evidence to mislead. As night fell, Hensley still sat in his dark office, staring at the map covered in crisscrossing marks. Every lead dead-ended. Doug Renner was the perfect profile for a frame job. Ordinary, easy to suspect, with job and vehicle fitting the scene data. If the perpetrator had calculated that far, he didn't just know how to kill, he knew how police think. Outside the window, light rain fell on the parking lot, headlights reflecting through the water like metal streaks. Doug's silver Ford Econoline, once the investigation's focus, now sat quietly among the row of workers' trucks, so ordinary no one noticed it anymore. Hensley closed the log, leaned back in his chair. He knew the Lydia Carter case was entering a stall, wrong suspect, fuzzy evidence, and the real one still free, maybe smirking as he read the evening news about the suspect released. July 1983, after Doug Renner's release, the Lydia Carter case quickly faded into silence. The press stopped covering it, locals moved on to other stories. In the Arlington PD office, Lieutenant Ray Hensley kept the large diagram board on the wall, pinned with photos, maps, and handwritten note scraps. Every morning he stared at it, hoping some small detail would click, but everything stayed blank. The nylon cord, tire tracks, AM, note, all common meaningless when isolated. Nothing new surfaced. Additional searches along the Trinity River lasted 2 more weeks. Divers, K9 units, and metal detectors were deployed, but they found only mud and trash. The final autopsy report concluded, no samples sufficient to identify a suspect. DNA tech wasn't widespread then, analysis limited to blood type and materials, so every lead hit a dead end. Early August, the department decided to shelve the file. Hensley objected, but superiors said there was no basis to continue. "We can't keep going without something new," the chief said. He had to sign off. Case File 83, NI-004. Lydia Carter went into a sealed box, labeled Pending Investigation, and moved to the basement archives. Hensley kept a copy, and a few photos in his private drawer, what he called unclosed memories. Elaine Carter stayed in Arlington a few more months, calling weekly for updates. But Hensley's answers were always the same. "We don't have anything yet, ma'am." By year's end, she moved back to Fort Worth with her son. Room 114 at Kensington Motor Lodge was cleaned out, leaving only a half-burned candle and some dried flower petals someone had left. From 1984 to 1989, the Lydia Carter file was reopened 3 times per protocol, each review lasting just weeks. New investigators found no additional facts. The 1981 Waco case, once compared, had lost evidence, no basis for linkage. Results unchanged. Suspect unidentified. Hensley was promoted to captain in 1987 and transferred to another division, but he never forgot. In his new desk drawer, he kept Lydia's photo in her school uniform, next to the note, a traceless case, but unforgettable. He told colleagues it taught him the silence of crime, when all evidence speaks, but no one understands it. Early 1990s, as crime records digitized, hundreds of old cases entered the new database. Lydia Carter's file was among the first cold cases. Evidence: nylon cord, fibers, scene photos, resealed in plastic bins. Years later, Hensley's handwriting still showed on the box label, Carter Lydia, 1983, Trinity River. DNA tech emerged, but prioritized cases with specific suspects. When Hensley requested sample analysis, it was denied for insufficient sample and high cost. He retired in 1997, taking a file copy and Lydia's photo. In his personal journal, he wrote, "Someday science will speak for us." Early 2000s, a young archivist relabeled the file with code 83, N004, cold case. From then, that became its official ID. Yearly the system auto-updated. No new evidence, no suspect. No one mentioned Lydia Carter anymore, except a few old investigators who remembered the name as a reminder. 20 years later, the Trinity River still flowed through Arlington, quiet as that morning the body was found. The riverbank there now a park, trees lush and green, just a small wooden sign reading Riverbend Trail. No one knew it had once been the scene of a shocking murder. In his wood frame house on the outskirts of Fort Worth, retired Ray Hensley sometimes pulled out the old file folder. He reread each handwritten note in his own script. Perp may have deliberately planted evidence to mislead. After all those years, that note remained the only real clue. He closed the folder, set it on the shelf. Sunset light filtered through the window onto the faded cover, where the red lettering had dulled. Case 83, N004, status, cold. The Lydia Carter case officially became one of Arlington's longest-running cold cases. No suspect, no witnesses, no resolution, just a name lying silent in the long list of victims still awaiting justice. 30 years after Lydia Carter's death, Case 83-004 had almost been forgotten. In 2013, in the old archives of the Arlington Police Department, among hundreds of dusty file boxes, a small plastic box labeled Carter, Lydia, cold case remained sealed. Inside were a few black and white photos, Lieutenant Hensley's handwritten reports, along with evidence bag #47A, a piece of the victim's fingernail collected in 1983. In May 2013, the Cold Case Unit was re-established to review old cases. The state of Texas-funded Evidence Recovery Initiative program encouraged reanalysis of evidence using modern DNA technology. Young technician Rachel Lynn was assigned to check the list of viable samples. When she opened the Lydia Carter box, she discovered that fingernail bag #47A was still sealed, never retested. Under the lab light, Rachel saw a bit of dark epidermis stuck under the nail, possibly foreign cells. She immediately noted a recommendation to send the sample for DNA analysis. A few days later, the file was transferred to Detective Sarah Coleman, the lead investigator of the Cold Case Unit. She had cracked many old cases using biological evidence and was known for her patience and attention to detail. When rereading the Lydia Carter file, Sarah lingered on Hensley's handwritten lines. The perpetrator may have intentionally staged the scene. She noted in the margin, hypothesis correct, but no DNA back then. Sarah personally went down to the archives to check the evidence. Bag #47A was opened in a sterile lab. A small portion of the fingernail was sent to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab in Austin, the state's most advanced DNA lab. The remainder was resealed in a deep freezer. While waiting for results, Sarah digitized the entire old file, crime scene photos, maps, suspect lists, autopsy reports. She noted two previously unexploited details: a gray synthetic fiber and metal dust on the nylon rope. Both could be reanalyzed using new spectroscopy and microscopy technology. Early June, the lab sent the first results. Sample #47A contained DNA from two people, Lydia Carter and an unidentified male individual. The genetic profile was complete enough to create a separate one. The DNA sequence didn't match any data in the CODIS system, but this was the first time in 3 decades that police had biological evidence of the real perpetrator. Sarah immediately reopened the case. An emergency meeting was held between the Cold Case Unit and the FBI Dallas office. The plan was to cross-reference the new profile through the federal Nameless Project program, which specializes in identifying DNA in unsolved cases. However, before proceeding, the sample's legality needed to be ensured. When checking the storage log, Sarah discovered that sample #47A had been resealed in 1990, but without the responsible person's signature, something that could get the evidence thrown out in court. She and Rachel prepared a verification report. The forensics lab reanalyzed the seal surface, confirming the sample hadn't been contaminated or altered. Once authenticated, Sarah proceeded with retesting the nylon rope and fabric scrap using spectroscopy. The new results showed metal dust on the rope containing manganese and iron, compounds characteristic of bridge construction mechanics. The gray fiber matched protective gloves used on job sites, aligning with Hensley's observation 30 years earlier. In the small office of the Cold Case Unit, Sarah sat at her desk, looking at the black and white crime scene photo and the new DNA results sheet. 3 decades bridged by a single fingernail. She thought to herself, "Hensley, you were right. He didn't disappear. He was just waiting for science to catch up." On July 8, 2013, Sarah completed the case reopening report. In the summary sent to the police chief, she wrote, "DNA sample #47A identifies an unidentified male individual. Evidence sufficient to reopen investigation under Code Case 83004R. Recommend expanding search via genetic genealogy." The Lydia Carter case was officially restarted after 30 years of silence. The conference room lights burned all night as technicians entered the DNA data into the new analysis system. On the screen, hundreds of gene sequences appeared, arranged into strings of ATGC characters. To Sarah, it wasn't just data, it was the voice of the forgotten girl by the Trinity River bank all those years ago. Now, finally, being heard. Late that night, she closed her laptop and looked out the window where light rain was falling. In the darkness, it seemed Lieutenant Hensley's gravelly voice from the old newspaper pages echoed back. "No case ever truly ends, only cases waiting their turn to be told again." And now, Lydia Carter had her turn. Late July 2013, the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Lab sent a detailed report to the Cold Case Unit. In the 30-plus page file, the first line silenced the whole team. "Unidentified male DNA, profile eligible for entry into CODIS database." 30 years after the case, they finally had a biological trace of the perpetrator. Detective Sarah Coleman read every page carefully, marking key items. The DNA profile included 21 complete loci, with a random match probability near 0. But at 2 positions, the report noted, secondary DNA signals suspected contamination. That small note stopped her cold. If the cause couldn't be proven, the entire profile could be rejected in court. Sarah and technician Rachel Lynn reviewed the original gene graphs. On the screen, 2 segments showed fainter secondary waves, signs of a second DNA mixed in. Rachel thought the sample was too old, stored over 30 years and thus oxidized. But Sarah wasn't satisfied. She rechecked the preservation log and noticed the familiar detail. Sample bag #47A had been resealed in 1990, without the responsible person's signature. This had raised questions when reopening the file. Now it became the main suspicion. To verify, Sarah invited an independent expert from the Dallas County Forensic Center to examine it. Under the microscope, they discovered the old adhesive layer had been cut and retaped with a different type. Preliminary conclusion: the sample may have been opened during the 1990 inventory. No evidence of tampering, but this trace could affect its admissibility in court. Not wanting to risk it, Sarah sent a request to the FBI laboratory in Quantico for in-depth analysis and separation of the contaminated DNA strands. While waiting for results, she reviewed the 1990 storage staff list. Most had retired, only Frank Doyle, the technician on duty then, remained. Sarah visited him at a Dallas nursing home. Doyle vaguely recalled someone on the team opening the box to check the seal but not logging it. Not enough evidence to assign blame, but sufficient to confirm the sample had been handled again. 6 weeks later, results from Quantico arrived. The report confirmed the primary DNA strand was intact, but there was minor contamination from another male source, likely a 1983 forensic staff member. Though it didn't affect the results, the sample needed thorough verification before CODIS entry. Sarah breathed a sigh of relief. The original evidence was still valid. In the Quantico file, the description noted the primary DNA belonged to a male of North American ancestry, with an occurrence rate in the population under 0.01%. With this rarity, the chances of identifying the perpetrator were very high if comparative data was available. However, Sarah knew the next step, genealogy analysis, would require time and complex legal procedures. She spent many nights reviewing the entire sample handling process since the cold case unit reopened the case, from Rachel's discovery, shipping to Austin, then to Quantico. Every line, every signature in the logs, was carefully documented to ensure the evidence's legal value. No one gets to say this result isn't up to standard, she told Rachel, as she signed the final log. Early October, Sarah uploaded the DNA profile to the CODIS system under code TXC83004R. The system took a few hours to compare. First result: no match with any existing criminal profiles. Though disappointed, she knew this was just the beginning. From now on, whenever a new DNA profile was entered, the software would automatically compare it to Lydia Carter's. At the same time, Sarah had the old evidence reanalyzed with modern technology, the nylon rope and gray fabric scrap. Electron spectroscopy showed metal dust on the rope containing manganese and iron, compounds commonly used in bridge mechanics. The fiber matched industrial protective gloves. The results perfectly aligned with Hensley's 1983 file notes. That evening, Sarah sat alone in the office. On the desk was a photo of 12-year-old Lydia and the freshly printed DNA results. 30 years, a generation passed, and now the tiny trace under the fingernail told the story no one could hear back then. She wrote the final line in the report to superiors. DNA sample #47A confirms unidentified male individual, secondary source, likely contamination from 1983 forensic staff. Recommend proceeding to next step, genetic genealogy analysis, forensic genealogy. She closed the file, labeled it red, active investigation. The office light reflected on the old photo of Lydia Carter, her youthful face, now a symbol of an entire generation of investigators' persistence. 30 years later, the case finally had a chance to speak its truth, thanks to a small fingernail sample and technology that didn't exist when the girl was killed by the Trinity River. For 5 years after the case 83004R DNA profile was entered into the system, the result remained unchanged. No match found. By early 2018, Detective Sarah Coleman realized that if they just waited for the criminal database, the Lydia Carter case would be buried again. At that time, a new technology was emerging, forensic genealogy, allowing suspect tracing through public civilian DNA data. In April 2018, Sarah attended a Fort Worth PD workshop on this technique, where Parabon Nanolabs presented success in tracking the Golden State Killer. The idea of cross-referencing crime DNA with voluntary databases like GED Match opened new possibilities. Right after the workshop, Sarah proposed a collaboration between Arlington PD, Fort Worth PD, and Parabon. The unidentified male DNA profile from the Carter case was sent to their Virginia lab. In June, Dr. Jenna Albright's team at Parabon separated and recoded the DNA strand, comparing it to millions of records in GED match. After 3 weeks, results showed 3 individuals with distant relation to the suspect from a McAllister family branch in Iowa. When building an expanded family tree, Parabon identified a man named Evan Charles McAllister, born around 1957, who had lived in Arlington, Texas, during 1982-1984. The information caught Sarah's attention immediately. Civil records showed Evan was an electrician who had worked on the Handley-Etterville Bridge project, exactly the area identified as the body transport site for Lydia. His legal record was nearly clean, with only a 1981 administrative violation. When compared to the 1983 witness sketch of the suspicious man, the facial features, build, and hairstyle matched surprisingly well. However, the law didn't allow genealogy data as evidence for charging. To go further, Sarah needed actual DNA from the man. Tax records showed Evan now lived in Denton, Texas, about 30 miles from Arlington, still working as an electrical mechanic at a small shop. The investigative team planned surveillance. For days, Sarah and technician Rachel Lynn followed Evan to work, stopping at his usual morning coffee shop. The man, now in his 60s, with gray hair and a sturdy build, wore gray gloves, the exact type noted in the 1983 file. Neighbors described him as polite, quiet, lives alone. To Sarah, that normalcy made it all the more chilling. Early September, she obtained a special surveillance warrant for indirect DNA collection. One morning, as Evan left the shop, he tossed his paper cup into the trash. The team immediately recovered it, sealed it, and sent it to the Fort Worth lab. 2 weeks later, results came back. DNA on the cup matched 100% with the unidentified male sample from the Lydia Carter case. Sarah sat stunned, reading the confirmation line. Perfect match, confirmed male subject. After 30 years, the silent DNA strand under a little girl's fingernail had named the real man. She printed the results, clipped them into the file, then called her superior. "We found him." Despite the clear results, Sarah reviewed every detail to avoid mistakes. Parabon sent a complete report. Evan McAllister shared a great-great-grandparent with the 2 initial GED match accounts. Third cousins, proving direct genetic linkage. It couldn't be coincidence. To be certain, she cross-checked employment info. Evan had an electrical license issued in March 1983, right when Lydia was killed. His former company confirmed he quit abruptly mid-year, saying he wanted to switch to mechanics. Every piece began fitting: occupation, location, vehicle, rope type, even timing sufficient to transport the body to the Trinity River. On October 10, 2018, Sarah met with the Fort Worth PD commander to present the file. The summary report concluded, DNA from sample #47A, 1983, matches exactly with indirect DNA collected from Evan Charles McAllister, born 1957, residing in Denton, Texas. GED match family tree confirms McAllister lineage, Iowa origin. Recommend warrant for arrest. The superior read it and said simply, 35 years. Good work, Coleman, make it airtight. That night, Sarah sat in the cold case unit office. On the desk was the thick file, 1983 crime scene photos, Parabon's DNA report, and the arrest warrant draft awaiting signature. Beside it was the black and white photo of Lydia Carter, bright eyes, and shy smile. 30 years earlier, Hensley had written in his notebook, "He knows the river. He works with his hands." Now every word had become truth. On October 12, the final report went to the chief's office. On the cover page in bold, Case 83004, primary suspect identified, Evan C. McAllister. After 3 decades, and countless dead ends, The Lydia Carter case finally had a name and a face. Sarah folded the file shut, leaning back in her chair. She knew the road ahead, warrant, interrogation, and prosecution, was the real challenge. But at least now, justice had a clear shape. A man living quietly in Denton town, carrying in his blood the DNA strand that 35 years ago had been left under the fingernail of the 12-year-old girl by the Trinity River. In October 2018, after the genealogy results from Parabon confirmed the identity of Evan Charles McAllister, Detective Sarah Coleman knew that every subsequent step had to be executed perfectly. Just one small error in surveillance or sample collection could cause the case file to be thrown out in court. She obtained a special surveillance warrant from Tarrant County Court, allowing the indirect collection of the suspect's DNA without direct contact. Denton, Texas, a quiet town north of Fort Worth, was where Evan had lived for over 20 years. He ran a small machine shop on North Locust Street, repairing electrical machinery and welding equipment for construction projects in the area. To his neighbors, Evan was good-natured, punctual, and rarely made noise. But to Sarah, that normality was the most dangerous facade. On the first morning in Denton, Sarah sat in a gray SUV parked 2 blocks from Evan's shop, along with technician Rachel Lynn. They observed through binoculars, noting every detail. 6:45 a.m. Evan left his house. 7:02, he stopped at Denton Bean Corner Coffee Shop, ordered a cappuccino and a toasted bagel. 7:20, he arrived at the shop, unlocked the door, turned on the local radio and started work. The routine repeated almost identically every day. Sarah meticulously noted in her notebook, no companions, no notable social contacts, extremely regimented. Over 2 weeks they tracked his entire routine. On weekends, Evan shopped at the nearby grocery store, occasionally fished at Louisville Lake, and paid in cash without using credit cards. A 61-year-old man, living quietly, no wife, no children, few friends, ideal for someone who once wanted to disappear. On October 18th, Sarah decided to proceed to Phase 2, indirect DNA collection. Per regulations, they needed evidence that the sample had been discarded in a public place. Sarah chose the early morning when Evan left the coffee shop. He ordered his coffee to go as usual, drank it, and tossed the paper cup into the trash bin by the door. Rachel approached, latex gloves ready, picked up the cup with tongs, and placed it in a sterile bag. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. The cup was sealed, labeled Sample DTX01, and immediately sent to the Fort Worth Crime Lab via a tamper-evident transport vehicle. The 3-day wait for results became the longest period in Sarah's career. She barely slept, preparing the case file while reviewing the entire procedure to ensure no legal violations. On the 3rd night, when the email from the lab arrived, she opened it and read the first line: DNA profile DTX01 matches 100% with case 83004R Lydia Carter. Match probability, 1 in 5.6 quintillion. Sarah froze. 35 years, hundreds of false leads, and now a single line of data had tied Evan McAllister's name to the death of the 12-year-old girl by the Trinity River. She printed the results, laminated them, and placed them next to Lydia's photo on her desk. 2 final pieces of time had clicked into place. The next day, the surveillance team held an emergency meeting at Fort Worth PD. Sarah presented the results are absolute confirmation. McAllister's DNA matches the sample found under Lydia Carter's fingernails in 1983. No possibility of error. Her superiors ordered continued surveillance for a few more weeks to gather behavioral evidence before seeking a formal arrest warrant. Sarah's team rotated shifts for monitoring. A small camera was installed in a car parked near the shop, another device hidden in an old mailbox across from Evan's house. Through the video, they noted his habit of smoking on the porch every evening, using a metal lighter engraved with EM. Every action was documented, not because they expected him to slip up, but to prove a continuous non-interfering chain of surveillance. One night in early November, Sarah and Rachel sat in the car, watching the shop's lights flicker through the window. Evan was welding a steel frame, sparks flashing in the darkness. "He looks like a regular guy," Rachel said softly. Sarah replied, "Most of them do." She recalled Lieutenant Hensley, who had once written in his journal, "He works with his hands." 3 decades later, those words echoed in her mind like a reverberation. In the following weeks, they collected 2 additional supplementary samples to bolster the file, a cigarette filter butt and an empty water bottle Evan discarded in his pickup truck. Results from all 3 samples matched the Lydia Carter case DNA perfectly. No doubt remained. In the report submitted to the Fort Worth police chief on November 15, 2018, Sarah summarized, "Suspect Evan Charles McAllister, born 1957, electrician machinist in Denton, Texas. Indirect DNA, DTX01, DTX02, DTX03, matches 100% with sample hash 47A collected at the scene in 1983. Evidence confirms identity of the perpetrator." Once the report was signed and approved, the case officially shifted from cold case to active homicide investigation. A task force was formed to prepare the arrest plan. Sarah was designated lead investigator, the only one who understood the full progression from 1983 to now. That night, she got home late. Autumn wind blew hard through the window. Sarah reopened Hensley's original file, rereading the faded lines. "No one hides forever. Time will tell. He had been right. Evidence never vanishes, it just waits for someone patient enough to listen." On November 20th, Sarah and the surveillance team returned to Denton for the final time. They sat in the car, watching Evan lock the shop door and load his tool bag into the pickup. He turned on the headlights, drove off, his demeanor as calm as ever. Sarah noted the final entry in her book. Subject maintained stable behavior, no suspicion of surveillance. Appropriate time for action. Outside, the Texas sky darkened, light rain falling on the car window. Sarah gripped the case file tightly in her hand, knowing that after 35 years, the path to justice for Lydia Carter was nearly at its end. Tomorrow, she would seek the formal arrest warrant, closing the longest surveillance chapter in her career, and opening the finale to a case once forgotten by time. On the file cover, she added a small line in red pen, as Hensley had done. "DNA doesn't forget, it just waits." Early morning on September 17, 2019, the town of Denton, Texas, was still shrouded in thick fog. After nearly a year of surveillance, Detective Sarah Coleman and the Fort Worth PD task force and SWAT team were ready to execute the plan. On the command board, a photo of 62-year-old Evan Charles McAllister took center position, with the red words below "Primary Suspect, Case 83004R." After 36 years, the Lydia Carter case was about to close. At 6:10 a.m., the police convoy left the parking lot. Sarah sat in the back seat, clutching the worn original case file. In her mind, the image of 12-year-old Lydia appeared, the shy smile by the motel door in 1983. Today, she told herself, we end this journey. Evan's small house sat at the end of a quiet street, surrounded by old oak trees. The SWAT team deployed in a perimeter formation. At 6:42, the commander ordered, "Go." The loudspeaker blared, "Evan Charles McAllister, this is Fort Worth Police. You are surrounded. Exit the house immediately." Silence inside. Seconds later, lights came on. The door opened, and Evan appeared, wearing a gray flannel shirt, still holding a wrench in his hand. He looked around, voice hoarse. "What's this about?" Sarah stepped forward, voice controlled. "Mr. McAllister, I'm Detective Coleman. We have a warrant for your arrest on murder charges. The Lydia Carter case, 1983. Evan stood frozen, eyes sunken deep, then muttered, "I knew this day would come." Police subdued him, and read his Miranda rights. As he was handcuffed, the surveillance team searched the house. On the workbench in the garage, they seized a wooden-handled buck knife, a model produced in the late 1970s, matching the description in the old file. In the closet, a roll of white industrial nylon rope still in its packaging. And in a bedroom drawer, Sarah found a 1983 Arlington map, yellowed with age, circled in red pen near the Trinity River Bank location. At the map's edge was a handwritten note, field access, 10 mins from motel. She stared at the red circle, heart pounding. 36 years earlier, that's where Lydia's body had been found. The map was sealed with the evidence and transported to Fort Worth PD. Evan was escorted to the vehicle, amid a crowd of curious neighbors. A middle-aged woman exclaimed, "Can't believe it. He used to fix my lights." Another shook her head. "I saw him at the store every week. Such a nice guy." They didn't know that the polite man had carried the secret of one night in 1983. News of the arrest spread across Texas within hours. Headlines blared, "1983 cold case solved. Local mechanic arrested in 35-year murder." Images of Evan in handcuffs outside his home flooded local TV. That afternoon, Sarah oversaw the evidence intake. The buck knife was sent to the forensics lab for micro-trace analysis. The nylon rope compared to the 1983 scene sample. The map scanned under UV light, revealing machine oil stains, similar to those used in welding shops. Every piece was fitting together, as Lieutenant Hensley had predicted years ago. At a brief press conference, the Fort Worth PD chief stated, "After more than 3 decades, thanks to tireless efforts and modern DNA technology, we have identified and arrested the suspect in the Lydia Carter case. Justice may be late, but it is never lost." Sarah stood behind the reporters, silent, watching Lydia's photo on the screen. In that moment, she saw the past and present converge. That evening, in the interrogation room, Evan sat across from Sarah. He waved his right to an attorney, just staring ahead with tired eyes. "You found me, huh? How long did it take?" Sarah replied, 36 years. Evan nodded faintly. "I didn't mean to kill that girl. I just didn't know how to stop." The vague words hung heavy in the air. Sarah stayed silent, turning on the recorder, letting each syllable drop like the weight of the past. Whatever he said, the DNA results and physical evidence were already irrefutable. As she left the room, she paused at the one-way mirror. Evan bowed his head, hands clasped tight, fluorescent lights casting over his gray hair. A man who had lived his whole life in peace, until time caught up. On September 18, Evan McAllister was charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping. The evidence was listed in the official file. 1 buck knife, 1979 model. 1 roll of white industrial nylon rope. 1 1983 Arlington map, marked at the scene, all confirmed to match details in Hensley's 1983 report. That afternoon, Sarah completed the report to her superiors. Suspect arrested on September 17, 2019 in Denton, Texas. DNA matches sample hash 47A completely. Physical evidence corroborates 1983 events. Recommend transfer of file to Tarrant County Prosecutor's Office. She signed it, closed the binder, then looked at Lydia's photo taped to the desk corner. Over 30 years, justice had returned, not through anger, but through the steadfastness of those who never forgot. Outside, Denton's sunset painted the sky red. Sarah stood by the window, watching the prison van carrying Evan pull away. The vehicle rolled slowly, leaving behind the peaceful street, where a killer had hidden for half his life. On the final case file cover, she wrote in red pen, as Hensley had, Case 83004, suspect in custody. Justice delivered. Evan Charles McAllister's first interrogation took place on the morning of September 19, 2019, in interview room 3. At the Fort Worth Police Department, the small room, harsh white fluorescent lights spilling onto the cold steel table. Evan sat silently, wrists still marked from the cuffs. Detective Sarah Coleman entered, carrying the thick case file she had pursued for over 6 years. Sarah began. "Mr. McAllister, we have DNA results, confirming a match between the 1983 sample and the indirect sample collected from you in 2018. Do you want to explain this? Evan leaned back in his chair, voice even. You're mistaken. I don't know who Lydia Carter is. Sarah flipped open the file, placing a 1983 crime scene photo in front of him. Are you sure you've never seen this girl? Evan's eyes flickered slightly. No. You lived in Arlington in 1983. Yes. I worked on the Handley Bridge construction, less than 2 miles from where her body was found. Evan fell silent, hands clenching. The interrogation lasted over 2 hours. Evan denied any involvement, claiming the items found in his house, the buck knife, nylon rope, Arlington map, were just old tools. I collect maps, kept my dad's knife, and nylon rope. Everyone has some. Sarah looked him in the eye, and by coincidence, all matched the Lydia Carter case evidence. Evan didn't answer, just stared down at the table. After the first session, Sarah and the technician reviewed the full recording. In the segment about the Trinity River bank, Evan unconsciously described that South Bank stretch is steep, with drainage ditches, trucks get stuck easy. The statement matched the 1983 scene report, a detail never publicly released. And in another part he muttered, "The girl didn't scream, just asked if I'd take her home." Sarah sat stunned. That could only come from someone who was there with the victim. The next day, she presented the audio clip to prosecutor Mark Ellis. Not a direct confession, but it's insider knowledge, she said. Ellis nodded, requesting continued interrogation with counsel present for legal recording. On the afternoon of September 20th, Evan appeared for the second time, looking exhausted. His court-appointed attorney advised him to remain silent. But when Sarah played back the clip, Evan smirked. "Did I say that? I don't remember." Sarah leaned in. "You know exactly how steep that bank is, even though the info was never released. How, if you've never been there?" Evan looked away. "Where did you encounter Lydia?" "I don't remember. You pulled over near the bus stop, right? A witness saw your beige Ford Econoline." "No one remembers that after all these years. But DNA does," Sarah replied. "And it says you were the last one with Lydia." The silence stretched nearly a minute. Evan bowed his head, voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted to talk. She was scared, and I lost control." Sarah held her breath. He continued, voice trembling. "That night I saw her outside the motel. I stopped and asked if she needed a ride. She nodded. I was just gonna drop her at the highway. But then, I drove toward the river. I don't know why," Evan recounted disjointedly. "She panicked. I said we'd just stop for a bit. When she screamed, I grabbed her shoulder. Then everything went black. I didn't mean to, but when I came to, she wasn't breathing." He slumped forward, hands shaking violently. The attorney interjected softly, but Evan brushed him off. 30 years, he said quietly. "Every night I see her standing by the river." The statement was transcribed into a 12-page document. Evan admitted approaching Lydia, on the evening of June 26, 1983, driving her to the Trinity River bank, and causing an unintended death. Afterward, he panicked, used the nylon rope to secure the body, then fled. He denied premeditated murder. Sarah knew the excuse was just to mitigate the charge. She cross-referenced the statement, with new forensics fiber traces on Lydia's shirt, matched gloves, found in Evan's garage. The nylon rope matched structure and batch production with the scene sample. No doubt left. This was the perpetrator Lieutenant Hensley had tirelessly sought. While the investigative team finalized the file, the forensics technician resolved a lingering detail. The secondary DNA trace in fingernail sample hash 47A. Testing revealed the second DNA string came from a 1983 forensics technician due to a sealing error during sample transfer. The official report concluded, no DNA from any individual other than suspect Evan McAllister. This eliminated any possibility of accomplices, confirming he was the sole perpetrator. On September 25th, Sarah returned to the interrogation room. Evan looked calm, almost relieved. She asked, "Do you have anything to say to Lydia's family?" Evan raised his head, voice low. "I thought I'd forgotten. But no, every time I hear running water, I see her standing there. You'll have to face that in court." "Maybe so," he replied softly. "At least now I don't have to hide anymore." Sarah watched as he was led away. His aged figure disappeared down the long hallway, under dim yellow lights. In that instant, she didn't see a brutal killer, but a man imprisoned by his own guilt for half a lifetime. But she knew remorse couldn't replace justice. That afternoon, she sat in her office, writing the summary report. Suspect Evan C. McAllister confessed to approaching and transporting victim Lydia Carter on the night of June 26, 1983. Statement matches scene details, including unreleased terrain specifics. DNA analysis confirms only suspect's sample. Secondary DNA identified as 1983. Preservation error. Conclusion: McAllister is the sole perpetrator. Sarah closed the binder, looking up at Lydia's photo on the desk. Bright eyes, tiny smile. Outside, Texas sunset cast an orange-gold glow through the window, tinting the room with memory's hue. 36 years earlier, Lieutenant Hensley had written in his journal, "One day, the truth will rise from the water." Now that water had carried justice back. Lydia Carter finally spoke, not through cries, but through evidence, and the persistence of those who never stopped searching for her. After Evan McAllister confessed that everything happened near a vacant lot with a drainage ditch, Detective Sarah Coleman immediately reviewed the 1983 Arlington map. The details he described did not match the location where Lydia's body was found, but were further east, near the current Riverbend Park area. The old map of Evans obtained from his home also had a circled mark exactly at this spot. On September 30, 2019, Sarah and the Fort Worth Crime Scene Unit's forensics team arrived at the Riverbend Park area. Now a green riverside park, but according to 1983 records, this spot was once a vacant lot, used to store materials for the Handley Bridge construction. Sarah stood in the middle of the grass, looking at the river sparkling in the early morning sun, a chill running down her spine. "This is exactly the place he described," she said softly. Police cordoned off the search area. Metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar equipment were deployed along the old drainage ditch path. After nearly 3 hours, the scanner detected a metal signal buried about 30 centimeters deep. As the technicians dug down, they uncovered a rusted buck knife with a rotted wooden handle, along with a small piece of gray fabric and several degraded segments of white nylon rope, all within a radius of less than 3 meters. Sarah crouched down, gloved up, and examined the broken, rusted blade closely. "This is where it really happened," she said. "The Trinity River bank where the body was found was just a staged scene, while this was the actual crime site." The entire evidence was sealed and sent to the Tarrant County lab for analysis. 2 weeks later, the results confirmed. The gray fabric sample matched the type of 1980s work shirt material, similar to the kind Evan wore in his Handley construction site employee photo. The buck knife was from the same production line as the one found in his garage. The nylon rope matched exactly in diameter and polymer fiber structure with the 1983 crime scene sample. The soil composition adhering to the evidence contained minerals characteristic of the eastern Arlington region, consistent with the Handley construction site area at that time. All the facts corroborated Evans' confession. He pulled over at the materials lot, talked to Lydia, and then everything happened too fast. Sarah returned to the scene once more. In the middle of the peaceful park, she looked at the strip of land sloping down to the ditch, once an empty lot. She imagined the summer night in 1983, the truck's headlights, the sound of insects, then the silence as Lydia collapsed. Even though he claimed it was not intentional, the evidence proved the act was completely premeditated: rope, knife, and a plan to dispose of the body. The investigative team's summary report stated clearly, the actual crime scene is located in what is now Riverbend Park, 2.3 miles east of the Trinity River bank. Evidence recovered, the buck knife, nylon rope, shirt fabric, all match items linked to suspect Evan McAllister. The 1983 riverbank scene was a staged disposal site intended to mislead the investigation. This discovery resolved a long-standing puzzle: why the initial scene was so clean, with no signs of a struggle or drag marks. Lydia's body had been deliberately moved. Riverbend Park was where the girl was actually killed. On October 15, Sarah led the team back to the scene to complete photography, mapping, and legal documentation. Under the hazy sunlight, they staked wooden markers, photographing the old ditch area. One technician said, "Did he stage the scene just to cover it up, or was there another reason?" Sarah replied, "I think he wanted to control how people found the girl to tell the story his way." That evening, she finalized the report for this phase. Evidence at Riverbend Park confirms the actual crime location. The Trinity River bank was used for disposal, creating a staged scene. Soil traces, knife marks, and nylon rope all align with 1983 case evidence. Conclusion: intentional murder, premeditated, and staged to mislead the investigation. Sarah closed her notebook, looking at Evan's old map still on the desk. The red circles he had drawn had led them to the place he had tried to hide for 36 years. Outside, a light Texas rain fell. She looked out the window, thinking of Lieutenant Hensley, who once believed the killer wanted the police to see the result of his work. Now that statement had come true. Beneath the damp soil of Riverbend Park, the final silent fragments had recounted the missing part of the story, and justice, at last, had found the true ground where it had once been buried. In May 2021, nearly 2 years after his arrest, Evan Charles McAllister went on trial at the Tarrant County Courthouse in Fort Worth, Texas. The proceedings drew crowds of press and locals. The Lydia Carter case had haunted the region for 3 decades. Evan entered the courtroom in an orange prison jumpsuit, gray hair, gaunt frame, eyes as dull as ash. In the prosecution row, Detective Sarah Coleman sat beside Prosecutor Mark Ellis, representing the state of Texas. Judge Rebecca Sloan presided. As the gavel struck to open the session, the room fell silent. Ellis began in a clear voice, "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the summer of 1983, 12-year-old Lydia Carter was murdered in Arlington. For 36 years, we had no answers. But thanks to science, the girl's voice has returned. And today, we are here to hear her." He paused, pointing at Evan. This man lived as an ordinary citizen, while the victim lay by the Trinity River. The defense attorney Douglas Ray strongly objected to the use of genealogical DNA data as evidence, arguing it violates citizens' privacy rights because it was sourced from public databases like GED Match. But Ellis countered, citing federal precedents that had upheld this investigative method, as long as the data was voluntarily shared by users. After a few minutes of deliberation, Judge Sloan ruled, "The court finds the genealogical DNA evidence was lawfully obtained. The defense's objection is overruled." That statement was a turning point. Sarah sat still, gripping her pen tightly, feeling a weight lifted from her chest after so many years. The trial lasted 10 days. The prosecution presented over 40 pieces of evidence, from the DNA match between the 1983 sample and the 2018 coffee cup swab, to the Riverbend Park forensics results, where the rusted knife, nylon rope and shirt fabric were found. Evan's confession transcript was also read in court. On the 3rd day, Sarah took the witness stand. She recounted the hunt for the killer. "We reopened the file in 2013 and discovered remaining DNA under the victim's fingernails. Genetic genealogy identified the McAllister family line in Iowa, leading to the suspect. Indirect testing confirmed an absolute match." Ellis projected images of Riverbend Park on the screen, the place where justice was found after 36 years. "This," he said, "is where the killer thought would be forgotten forever." Defense attorney Ray tried to counterattack. He claimed Evan's confession was coerced and lacked eyewitnesses. He asserted his client had only accidentally caused harm when Lydia panicked, then staged the scene out of fear. But the prosecution rebutted, playing the interrogation audio where Evan accurately described the drainage ditch and riverbank slope, details never publicly released. On the seventh day, the forensics lab presented the final report. Soil on the knife and nylon rope from Riverbend Park matched the soil on Lydia's shoes, with a margin of error under 1%. They also confirmed only Evan's DNA on all evidence, ruling out accomplices. Ray wouldn't give up. He argued that obtaining the DNA sample from the coffee cup was illegal, as it invaded privacy. Sarah was recalled to the stand to clarify. She said, "We had a lawful surveillance warrant and collected the sample from a public trash bin. There was no invasion of privacy." Judge Sloan nodded. "The court confirms the DNA evidence is valid." Ray fell silent. All avenues of rebuttal were closed. As the prosecution wrapped up, Ellis stood before the jury. Lydia Carter was only 12 years old. For 36 years, her killer lived among us. But DNA doesn't forget. Today, we are not just trying a man, we are restoring justice for a child. Sarah looked toward Evan. He sat with his head bowed, hands trembling slightly. When it was the defense's turn, Ray said only, "My client has lived with guilt. He is not a monster, just a panicked man." But even belated remorse couldn't erase the truth of the evidence. On the afternoon of May 14th, after 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom. The air was heavy as lead. Judge Sloan asked, "Has the jury reached a verdict?" The foreman replied, "Yes, Your Honor. We find the defendant Evan Charles McAllister guilty of first-degree murder." A murmur rippled through the room. Sarah closed her eyes, breathing deeply. Evan remained silent, his gaze empty. The judge read the sentence. Defendant Evan Charles McAllister is sentenced to life imprisonment, without parole eligibility, for the first 30 years. Reporters jostled for shots. The Arlington community breathed a sigh of relief, after nearly 4 decades of waiting. Outside the courthouse, Ellis stated, "Justice may be slow, but it never forgets." Sarah declined interviews. She spoke to only one reporter. "No one wins in this case. But at least, Lydia Carter has been named by the truth." That evening, she returned to the office, placing a copy of the verdict beside Lydia's photo. The file cover bore the clear words, "State of Texas versus Evan C. McAllister, guilty." The sunset light fell on the pale yellow paper, like time's final seal. Sarah sat quietly looking out the window. In her mind echoed Lieutenant Hensley's words, she had once read in the file. Justice comes slow, but sure, as long as someone keeps believing. Now, that belief had become reality. 38 years after the summer night of 1983, the trial closed not with tears, but with a profound quiet. The justice of those who never gave up. And somewhere, by the Trinity River, Lydia Carter could finally rest in peace. On the morning of May 16, 2021, the Tarrant County Courthouse courtroom was silent as a tomb. After 10 days of trial, the jury had reached a unanimous decision. Evan Charles McAllister was guilty of first-degree murder. All awaited the final sentencing. Judge Rebecca Sloan looked directly at the defendant, her voice stern. 38 years is a long time, but time cannot erase accountability. The court sentences defendant Evan Charles McAllister to life imprisonment, without parole. The gavel's wooden crack echoed dryly. Evan sat motionless, eyes on the floor, unresponsive. 2 officers escorted him from the courtroom. In the front row, Detective Sarah Coleman stood still, feeling not victory, but closure. Outside the courthouse, Texas sun shone down on the steps crowded with press. Prosecutor Mark Ellis stated, "Justice may be slow, but it is never lost." After 38 years, Lydia Carter has finally spoken. This case proves the power of science and the perseverance of those who don't give up. Sarah walked through the crowd, avoiding cameras. A reporter called out, "Do you think he regrets it?" She paused for a moment, then replied, "I think he has known that for a long time, but regret can't bring Lydia back." That afternoon, at Fort Worth PD headquarters, the cold case unit held a small meeting. On the large screen flashed a simple line, "Case 83004 are closed." The room stood, silent for a few seconds, then applauded. The chief presented Sarah with a commendation plaque, a small symbol of her 7-year journey of persistence. The case summary report was filed that day. Case name, Lydia Carter homicide, 1983. Suspect Evan Charles McAllister. Verdict, first-degree murder. Life without parole status. Closed case, May 2021. In the final press conference, Ellis mentioned Lieutenant Ray Hensley, who led the original 1983 investigation. He once said, "No case is ever truly lost, we just haven't seen it all yet." If he were alive, he would be proud of today. Sarah sat in the back, smiling quietly. In her mind echoed Hensley's words from years ago. He knows the river. He works with his hands. In the end, everything he had predicted was right. As the meeting ended, Sarah headed to the parking lot. The Texas sky was clear blue, the wind carrying the scent of damp earth after last night's rain. She opened her car door, placing the final case file on the seat. On the cover was printed clearly, "Case 83004 are closed. Verdict, life without parole." She looked at it for a long time, then folded it shut, like closing a door to the past. That evening, the TV news aired a special segment, "Cold Case Solved, After 38 Years. Justice for Lydia Carter." Footage of Evan being led away, followed a black and white photo of Lydia, from 1983. The final crawl across the screen read, "Justice never forgets." Sarah turned off the TV, standing by the window. Outside, wind from the Trinity River blew through, carrying the damp scent of a summer night. She closed her eyes, listening as if hearing Lydia whisper in the breeze. No longer resentment, just belated peace. The Lydia Carter case, after 38 years, was officially closed. No longer a cold case in the archives, but a symbol of the faith that justice can sleep, but never die. After the life sentence without parole was pronounced for Evan Charles McAllister, the Fort Worth Police Department released a comprehensive case report on Lydia Carter, a nearly 200-page file documenting the entire 38-year investigation process. The first page bore a simple line, "Justice delivered, Case 83004. The report divided the case into 5 phases: disappearance, initial investigation, case freezing, reopening in 2013, and cracking it through genetic genealogy DNA technology. All evidence, testimonies, and forensic data were re-verified against modern standards. In the conclusion section, Detective Sarah Coleman's name was mentioned as the one who proved that time cannot weaken justice if data is preserved and science continues to advance. Sarah was also the one who proposed reforms to the evidence storage system after the case. From the near loss of sample hash 47A in 1990, she drafted new preservation protocols, which later became the statewide standard. In the internal wrap-up meeting, she said, "If Lydia's fingernail fragment were no longer there, we would never have known the truth. Every piece of evidence, no matter how small, is a thread connecting the past to the present." From this case, the Fort Worth PD launched the Digital Evidence Preservation Initiative, a project to digitize and modernize the evidence storage warehouse, investing over $2 million to upgrade cold storage systems and attach QR codes to each sample. Old evidence was scanned, electronically identified, and preserved in stable environments, allowing reanalysis as technology advances. At the same time, the cold case unit expanded its staff, adding biologists, and signing a long-term partnership with Parabon Nanolabs, the firm that helped identify the McAllister lineage. As a result, Fort Worth became one of the first police departments in Texas to have a dedicated DNA database for unsolved cases. In the technical analysis section, the report stated, the 1983 DNA sequence remained viable, thanks to stable storage conditions and modern extraction techniques, allowing recovery of 95% of the gene sequence. The GED match database provided a third-degree relative match, paving the way to trace the McAllister lineage, the breakthrough that pulled the case out of deadlock after decades. Director Daniel Reeves stated at the press conference, "The Lydia Carter case shows that cold cases never truly die. They just wait until science is strong enough to reopen the door to time." A notable part of the report was the improvement to the chain of custody. Since 2022, all evidence at Fort Worth is encoded with the biometric identification of the handler, recording the entire access history to prevent seal violations, the error that once nearly caused the 1983 file to be destroyed. Additionally, the Cold Case Unit implemented a training program for young investigators on reading old files and analyzing degraded evidence. Sarah was assigned to lead the first course. Her opening lecture was concise: "Every cold case has a heartbeat. Just need to be patient enough to listen." In September 2021, the report was officially made public. Media outlets called the Lydia Carter case the symbol of the DNA investigation generation. In the following year, 14 old files were reopened, 2 of which identified suspects thanks to the model applied by Fort Worth. The Dallas Morning News article summarized, "A fingernail fragment stored in a plastic box since 1983 has changed how America views the concept of old evidence." For Sarah, the greatest reward was not the commendation, but that the system had changed. That evening, she returned to the office, standing before the glass cabinet, holding a copy of the Lydia Carter file. Under the light, the words "closed case" reflected sparklingly. She thought of Lydia, the girl who made an entire generation of police believe that justice is not measured by time, but by humanity's ability to hold firm to faith in the truth. Outside, the night wind from the Trinity River blew gently. In the news storage warehouse, thousands of evidence boxes were carefully sealed, ready for other cases. And thanks to Lydia Carter's story, everyone understood that, as long as one piece of evidence is preserved, the hope of justice will never be lost. In the fall of 2021, when the Lydia Carter case officially closed, Texas media called it the case that taught DNA to speak. The case not only brought justice to a 12-year-old girl, but also marked a turning point in modern investigation, where forensic genealogy became the tool connecting the past and present. At a seminar at the Texas Department of Public Safety, Detective Sarah Coleman presented her case-solving experience to over 200 specialists and forensic scientists. On the screen, images of Riverbend Park and the 1983 map appeared side by side with the genealogy tree leading to the McAllister lineage. "This case wasn't solved by luck," she said. "It was cracked because a 2 centimeters fingernail fragment was kept for 38 years, and because science finally caught up to human faith." Sarah's statement was quoted in the state's summary report. Scientists from Parabon Nanolabs affirmed this as one of the first cold cases in Texas fully solved by genetic genealogy. Dr. Jenna Albright, Parabon's DNA expert, said, "Before 2018, DNA investigation stopped at crime scene matches. With forensic genealogy, we can trace third or fourth generation relatives, turning genetic data into a human map." Alongside the admiration, the professional community also frankly reviewed the errors that nearly caused the case to fail. The 1990 seal error that almost led to sample hash 47A being discarded. Sarah recounted, "The evidence box sat covered in dust for nearly 30 years. If Rachel Lynn hadn't discovered it, the DNA sample would have been lost forever." Keeping evidence isn't just procedure, it's a promise to the victim. That error became a major lesson for the entire system. Since 2022, Fort Worth PD has applied new storage protocols. Every sample is encoded with the handler's biometrics and automatically tracked to avoid seal errors. Criminologist Dr. Henry Cooper of the University of North Texas commented, "The Lydia Carter case shows that science only has value when someone believes in it. Data is meaningless if no one has the patience left to rediscover it." From this success, the statewide cold case registry program was born. allowing police departments across Texas to share DNA data and update case progress on the same system. The Texas Tribune reported, "One case closed, but opening a new era for criminal investigation." In a post-trial interview, Sarah shared, "We went from yellowed paper files to 3D gene maps. But the most important thing isn't technology, but the faith that the truth is still there, just need us to be persistent enough to reach it." Fort Worth PD Director Daniel Reeves also viewed the case systemically. "Lydia Carter showed us that investing in DNA isn't just a cost, but a moral obligation. One properly preserved sample can change the fate of a victim's family." In the internal report, the cold case unit summarized 4 key lessons. Do not treat evidence as static. Every sample needs periodic checks to ensure reanalysis viability. Linked disciplines, forensics, genetics, and investigation must collaborate closely, instead of operating separately. Exploit open data. Databases like GDD Match can be bridges when criminal systems lack data. Uphold professional ethics. Using genetic genealogy must be transparent, protecting public privacy rights. Forensic Science Today concluded, "Lydia Carter is proof of the philosophy science remembers. Science doesn't forget, it just waits to be heard." In December 2021, Sarah received the Texas State Excellence in Cold Case Investigation Award. When speaking, she said simply, "I didn't solve the case alone. It was Lydia, and those who believed in her, who helped me." That evening, Sarah drove along the Trinity River bank, where city lights reflected on the still water. She recalled the nearly 8-year journey, from reopening the dusty evidence box to the day the judge pronounced the sentence. One case closed, but its legacy continued. In every lab, every evidence storage, every young investigator learning to read the past in the language of DNA. For Fort Worth PD, Lydia Carter was not just a victim given back her name, but a symbol of the faith that science and humanity, when aimed at the truth, can make justice live forever. In the winter of 2022, the new basement of the Fort Worth Police Department was completed, the home of the Cold Case Archives evidence storage. Rows of shiny metal shelves stood in neat order, each box affixed with a QR code and sealed with electronic tags. In the east wall corner, a clear plastic box labeled Carter, Lydia, File 83 Miss 004. Inside was the original file copy, yellowed 1983 crime scene photos, and a small evidence bag containing the fingernail fragment, the proof that brought justice back after 38 years. Detective Sarah Coleman personally placed the box into slot 4, row 7, the area for officially closed cases. She adjusted the label, gazing at the bold print, Case 83 Miss 004, closed May 2021. A silence filled the air. That small file box symbolized half her life pursuing justice, and for the generation of investigators who never gave up. White lights cast down on hundreds of other file boxes. Each was an unfinished story, a victim waiting for a voice. Sarah stood still, remembering the old storage warehouse, where damp cardboard boxes piled high, and Lydia's fingernail had been forgotten, in a dark corner. Now, it stood at the center, preserved like a symbol of endurance and faith. Under the new regulations, File 83 Miss 004 would be stored permanently as a standard document for handling backlog cases. In young investigator training materials, Lydia Carter became the first lesson: no evidence is too small, only those without enough persistence to keep it. A year later, a local TV station's reporter team filmed a feature on this storage facility. The camera panned over the bright cold shelves, pausing at box 83 Miss 004. The narrator's voice rang out, "In these boxes are hundreds of once-forgotten cases." One of them, the Lydia Carter case, proved that justice can come late, but never lost. The episode ended with footage of Sarah turning off the lights, the steel door closing, a soft click of the lock. The screen faded to black, with text appearing, "Justice remembers." From then on, the Carter case became an indispensable part of cold case unit history. Thanks to experience from this file, 14 other cases were reopened, and 2 identified suspects through genetic genealogy DNA. At the office, a black and white photo of Lydia was framed, placed next to the board listing solved cases. Occasionally, Sarah still returned to the storage. She didn't open the box, just stood looking at the words File 83 Miss 004. A young investigator once asked, "Why do you keep coming back when the case is closed?" She smiled, "Because I want to remember why I started." Upstairs, the cold case unit lights stayed on all night. New investigators, the generation raised with DNA technology, continued extending that journey. They no longer had to wrestle with yellowed paper files like Sarah once did, but still carried the same faith. Every case has its own voice. Just need enough patience to listen. That December, as the first snow-blanketed Fort Worth white, Sarah received a letter from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It read, "The Lydia Carter story reminds us that justice can be slow, but never off track." That evening, Sarah sat by the window of her small apartment overlooking the Trinity River. City lights reflected on the water, sparkling like memory fragments. She opened her old notebook, writing the final line, File 83 Miss 004. Closed, but never forgotten. In the basement of Fort Worth PD, hundreds of file boxes lay silently waiting. Among them, the clear plastic box named Lydia Carter still reflected the white light, a witness to a truth that never fades. Justice may come late, but it never disappears. The story Texas 1983 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. Reminds us of life in the U.S. today, in 3 key points. Technology, community and ethics. First, technology can save justice, but only if we preserve data. A #47F fingernail fragment stored since 1983, combined with modern DNA protocols and genetic genealogy. GED match, relative matching led to the real name. A coffee cup tossed in a public trash bin in Denton locked the evidence chain tight. Lesson: households, schools, local agencies should understand and support forensic science from testing to storage, while demanding local police transparency on chain of custody, as Fort Worth PD reformed it. QR codes, cold storage, access logs. Second, community is the decisive link. Evan McAllister was the nice neighbor, but his habits, work locations, route to Riverbend Park all left traces. Lesson: report suspicious behavior properly, non-emergency line. Teach kids public space safety skills, refuse rides, share real-time locations, and maintain neighborhood watch based on respect. Observe behavior, not appearance bias. Third, ethics and privacy boundaries. Forensic genealogy is useful, but needs transparent data consent. Communities should engage in policy dialogue, balancing privacy rights and public benefit. Ultimately, individual perseverance makes the difference. Detective Sarah Coleman's persistence, checking the 1990 seal error, re-digging hidden ground at Riverbend Park, is a reminder that justice comes late, but doesn't disappear. In today's life, persistently safeguard the smallest truths, support science, and care for each other as a responsible community. Thank you for following the story of the Lydia Carter case to the end. Proof that justice can come late, but has never disappeared. Please subscribe to the channel to join us in continuing the journey, exploring other cold cases, where the truth is still waiting to be told.